Hello, everyone. Welcome to Crownsmen Energy. I'm your host, Jared Downey. Today on the show, I almost forgot to introduce Gowdy Molina. You're back on the Crownsmen Productions, Gowdy. How are you?
I am very good.
Good. Okay. I'm gonna hand it over to you in a second, Gowdy,
Okay.
but I want to just give the audience an idea of who is coming on the show today. We're very excited to have Darcy Spady. He is the managing partner for Carbon Connect International. He also served as president at SBE. Hello, Darcy. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
We're very happy to have you on the show. There's going to be quite a bit of ground to cover, so I'm going to cut off your intro, get back to you, and hand it over to the sponsors for Gowdy.
Perfect. Yes. So today we have Power Zone equipment. When you need a specialized team of world class engineers for your oil and gas, pipelines, dewatering, or any fluid handling needs, you want to visit powerzone.com. In addition to their inventory of rebuilt pumps, motors, engines, they also have an amazing team to design and engineer your systems, no matter the challenge, no matter the location. Get in the zone with Power Zone. You can visit them at powerzone.com. And of course, we can't forget about Savanaugh equipment. Are you working on pipelines, oil and gas projects, renewable energy, or LNG, and you need to save some cash? Well, you can visit Savanaugh Equipment. They have industrial pumps, electrical equipment from motors to transformers, and even surplus pipe and much, much more available now. Visit them at savanaghequipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. Fabulous. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Gowdy. Darcy, you have 33 years in the oil and gas industry, so you've been around it. And so I'm going to I when I come into these interviews with someone with so much experience, it's sort of always trying to figure out where to start. I think I want to start just with who Carbon Connect is because um, we had Jackson Hagland on the show
Mhm.
before, and he talked a little bit about Mila. And there's this connection here between Carbon Connect. So can you set up what that connection is, sort of who the partners are, what Carbon Connect does, and then we'll go in from there.
Yeah, Carbon Connect is an organization that started thinking we were going to be primarily involved in training and perhaps some policy work and some exposure in the industry of methane mitigation. And suddenly we've morphed into both training and program delivery for jurisdictions, most notably for the Alberta government, two key programs for environment and parks on methane measurement and methane emission mitigation. So we're a company that basically looks at helping people get things done in the methane management, methane emission management space. It's hard to describe something that's new and changing this rapidly, but my partners, I think, are the key. Both were founding members of MELA, which is the Methane Emission Leadership Alliance. So their background is from the service side or the doing side of methane emission mitigation. And so Jackson Hagelin is the executive director of Methane Emission Leadership Alliance presently. He also has a consultancy called Modern West Advisory, which helps companies deal with everything in the methane emission mitigation space, as well as the larger goals of dealing with climate change and how companies address it, which is becoming more and more regulatory and financial. And my other partner is Al Dewar, who is CEO of a company called General Magnetic, which was one of the initial founding members of MELA as well, that makes a permanent magnet motor product line. And one of the things they do with that is replace pneumatic devices with permanent magnet motor, solar power driven permanent magnet motor power for various functions we do in the oil and gas industry that require kinetic energy, if you will. So my partners are in this space, have been in this space quite specifically for a long time. I myself am a more traditional 30 years in the industry doing the traditional drilling and completion, and in my time as the president of the Society of Petroleum Engineers International, got involved in the sustainability side of things, and through several events, got to know Jackson and Al, and we formed Carbon Connect, which we thought would be training, educating, and now we're delivering. So we deliver programs to help companies get compliant with emissions.
It's really good to have you on. I guess by natural progression, I guess Al should be the next guest because we've already had Jackson on. And when you say Al, that is he is also the former mayor of Calgary. Is that right?
Sometimes we refer to him as Your Worship, but it kind of goes to his head. So yeah, Al spent 12 years, has probably one of the most pragmatic mayors of Calgary. Did a really good job for 3 terms, and did it through some pretty tight times. So yeah, Al's background is actually water, wastewater, municipal side of things, and then he was involved as mayor, and then since that time he's been in the manufacturing side.
I want to jump into something just sort of on the surface. We don't need every details of your partnership or anything like that, but you know, the 3 of you, if you look at it, if anybody's watching the show and goes and looks at your 3 backgrounds, I mean, there's a lot of experience, and there's a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge that's going to come between the 3 of you. So obviously that's a strength. But even for myself, it's sort of developing, still at the point, and developing my own career. You have to learn to work with people and formulate those partnerships.
Mhm.
And people, you hear it a lot, talking about people need to know things you don't. But the 3 of you as a partnership, there's very separate streams that you specialize in. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how that partnership comes together, but also just how you approach dealing with people that are, I mean, they're heavy hitters. They know the industry, they bring a lot to the table, and there's got to be a collaboration between the 3 of you.
I think you're absolutely right, and for whatever reason, it's been a tremendous relationship. Jackson has a very long history of this economics of sustainability and the whole measuring air and things in the air. I mean, his whole background is that he's talked in his interview with you about how he got there. So he's got a lot of industry experience, but on the economic side and the ESG side, which was really important. A lot of domestic strength. Al has the manufacturing side of the equation, but Al also has been around the block as a mayor, and he really understands how people interact and how to do deliverables, especially for governments and jurisdictions. And I guess I was going to say I was the missing link, but maybe that's not the right reference. I was the missing piece, and we got together. I was doing some things with Al's company a few years back. We actually first ran into each other in Abu Dhabi, and then we got together at an SPE event called MEOS, Middle East Oil Show, and part of it was the MEES, Middle East Energy Summit. And I had Jackson come over to Bahrain and speak about what we're doing in Canada pragmatically in dealing with emissions. And Al was also in the room, and it was amazing. We sat there and we watched the world say, wow, we've signed the Paris Accord. We have SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals we have to meet. We'd really want to do this. We're all set up. How on earth are we going to deploy it? And so the 3 of us spoke about it, and then we sat there and we said, maybe we can help people understand how they can actually do what they need to do, both from their banker's perspective, their regulator's perspective, and just doing the right thing, and efficiency on top of that. So we started, and suddenly I realized I'm the engineer type of the 3 of us with the international exposure. And one of the things we found in the industry is, everybody's into drilling budgets and completion budgets, the frac programs. And we'll look at West Texas, massive dollars in drilling. Everybody talks about their drilling budget. People care a lot less about the poor guy down in the production department that actually is having to scrape coins together and make sure it happens.
Mm.
And my people in the drilling completion, SPE, reservoir production side of things, those are the users, those are the doers from the engineering perspective. So bringing the three of us together, I brought the people who have to install and monitor and efficientize the field. That they are, the SPE has an entire production and facilities group as one of their segments of their 160,000 members. So there's a whole bunch of people that I know from the engineering side that do stuff, and we can talk to them. So really, the three of us work well together in that Jackson has a tremendous set of experience here. Al's got another set here, and mine, it just so happened, was more on the pragmatic engineering / delivery side. And a lot of engineers and technical people are skeptical.
Mm.
So they say, yeah, we got to do this, we got to do that. We're having to do this. And then they look at things, and then they can't make a decision because the drilling budget and the completion budget stole all their money. So it's a great spot where everybody's receptive to say, holy Toledo, I can be efficient, I can be a better engineer, I can save the planet, and I can be a part of the change driver in my industry. And I'm not in the drilling budget, and I'm not in the completions budget. Right. So it's kind of been fun.
I can just imagine. I would love to be a fly on a wall to some of those meetings. I don't know Al, but talking to Jackson, I could just imagine some of the back and forth between the three of you. But I also wonder for you, when you've come sort of out of that engineering perspective, that background, and then joining SPE, and we talked off air about you really getting to travel the world as president of that organization. That must have really, I mean, every time I go to even a small local event, I learn things. So I can't imagine the amount of knowledge and just sort of eye-opening things that you saw traveling around in that role.
Yeah, it was a tremendous eye-opening experience. I wish that I could have done it earlier in my career, but it was later in my career, but I'm still very thankful for it. But what I realized very quickly in the start of my 3-year commitment. So I spent 3 years as an international board member with the Society of Petroleum Engineers, which was great. And I thought that was great. And then I wound up becoming the SP president globally, which is another 3 years. So I spent 6 years
Wow.
In a very influential role. And what I first realized, having spent 25, 30 years, mostly in North America, primarily in North America, is we live in a bubble in Calgary. Everything is myopic. Everything is an echo chamber. It just gets smaller and smaller as the problems get worse. And all we can see is past the edge of our bubble. And maybe there's a pipeline issue there, or maybe there's a border issue there, or maybe there's a Permian Basin issue there. And everything is very Calgary centric. And I realized it took me 49 different countries, about 75 trips to those 49 different countries, and 158 speeches. But I did realize by the end of my time that the world is so much different and so much bigger. And we here in the Canadian oil patch represent a small segment of that. And the world is so diverse, and we just need to get out there and see it.
When you said that you realized that, did you realize there was that bubble before, or did it actually change you doing that travel, those travels?
Mostly it changed me, but I think if you can hearken back, or if the people who are listening to this can think back to 20 or 30 years ago, we had some large Canadian independent oil and gas companies that were working abroad. So here in Calgary in the 80s and 90s, we had a bit more of an international focus when we had, you had lots of colleagues that would spend time in a Canadian company, perhaps working in Africa or Southeast Asia or Europe. And so there was a little bit more of an international flavor 20 years ago. Mm. And I think just because of markets, just because of the way things went, because of the model that worked very well for us in Calgary, of the small company being amalgamated by the big company, we became more myopic. So I think, in fairness, I did have a broader view 20 years ago. Mm. But when you're just in the bubble all the time, only thinking of your space, human nature is we think of those around us, and sometimes we even wonder about them, right? So that's just the way we do it. And it was just so refreshing to get out there and realize, most of the oil companies on earth are national oil companies. Almost all the lands on earth are owned by the crown or the government or the state. I mean, it's so different than what we get huddled into in this North American model all the time. So it was a good reminder, but I did learn a tremendous amount.
I actually wanted to, if you could. I mean, this is a big question, and I'm obviously not. I mean, we'd probably need about 40 shows to even begin to scrape the surface of it. But I wanted to understand, because I haven't traveled to 75 countries, and a lot of the audience isn't going to have done it. So can you actually set up a little bit, Darcy, of the energy system, the US system, the Canadian system, the global, just on that surface level of just sort of what you've seen and what you understand these systems to be in the energy sector specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. In my viewpoint, I'm not an expert. I'm an observer. Um, a land person, members of the AIPN, the petroleum negotiator people, they're much more familiar with systems and the negotiating patterns and joint venture agreements versus production sharing agreements and all these things on the global stage. But in general, most of the world, and think of the countries in the world. I mean, top five. I think top five producer, number one is US, number two is Saudi, number three is Russia, number four is somebody, number five is Canada. I mean, that's kind of the way it is. But if you think in that top 10, let's say, most of those countries, the company is the country. So Saudi Aramco is a great example. So you have all this mineral wealth, tremendous mineral wealth, but the company is the best government post you can have is looking after that. So the country is the company, is the regulator, is the employer, and that's a lot of the oil and gas produced on Earth, and that's not bad. The variety within that segment is huge, but basically, most oil and gas is the country, is the company. Then you get places that are more like us, where the crown or the state, Norway. Well, Norway is not the best example here, but in the UK or Europe, places in Europe, Australia, Canada, where the crown or the regulator is the government, and industry has to collaborate with government. Their royalty partner is the government, and so we learn to deal with that, and that's the way. So that's the other big chunk of oil and gas operations globally. And then you look at the very anomalous place in the United States, which is the number one producer, where it's primarily, not everywhere, but primarily freehold. So all of a sudden you get a driver that's completely different. You get a privately held mineral, which might be a very large old money group out of somewhere on the eastern seaboard. It might be what they may call fee lands. I worked about a third of my career in the US. It might be the farmer who's on surface. It might be just a random person, or it might be the oil company. So it's not often the government, unless you're on a reservation or an offshore block or a preserve. So the US system, in my mind, is driven by different drivers and very different. That's who we see every day in the paper when we compare ourselves. We don't compare ourselves to Romania. We don't compare ourselves to Vietnam. We compare ourselves to the Americans. They're our neighbor. They're our trading partner. They're our customer, pretty much number one. So everything we look at is how that's affecting our market. And I beg my colleagues to take a step back and say, no, what's Russia doing in the innovation side? Because they're one quick boat trip away, and they can come across the Arctic and ship. So what are they doing? There's a lot of different dynamics of some very significant players. And of course, again, we could take 40 shows to talk about this, but the political changes in the US as of the last few weeks certainly could change the flavor. And suddenly we, their neighbor, might be in a much better space from a banking and regulatory point of view, because the stuff we've been practicing for a decade, i.e. methane emissions mitigation and measurement, we might be ahead of the game and a really good neighbor to have for the American administration. So I just go off on this rant quite frequently about, look at the holistic part of the world. Look at what China's doing. Look at what Guyana's doing. Look at what Russia's doing. Look at what Norway's doing. Don't just always look at what West Texas is doing. That's a bad measure.
Well, in anything, when you're trying to figure something out, if you're looking at one stream and there's 50 streams that are making it happen, where do you think, you kind of touched on it, where do you think Canada sort of sits? Again, like you're talking about methane reduction, and I want to, once we cover this, I want to pivot into some of these programs that Carbon Connect has, or is distributing for, I should say. Where do you think Canada, you kind of touched on that they've already started some of this process earlier of updating technology and introducing new technology into the markets. Where do you sort of see us sitting today? Are we, do we not have as far to catch up? That's a strange sentence, but I think you know what I mean.
Well, I'll give you a strange answer with the answer in reverse. We are absolutely leaders and clearly in the right spot to lead the world, both from our technical expertise and our good attitude about it. So we are in an excellent spot. And here's partly why. We're a solid top 5 producer in the world of energy. We're a producer that's known throughout the world as doing it right and doing it collaboratively with the regulator and the operator. And think back 25 years ago when the first free trade agreement was signed, the US needed to have energy security. There's a reason that they wanted, that amongst other things in that free trade agreement. They needed energy security. Well, I dare say in the future, they may be in the same boat where it isn't just kind of they're no longer exporting. They might be in the importing because the rules have maybe tightened up. I don't know. They've got so many jurisdictions, but chances are they're going to tighten up the rules and make it a little more costly to drill and complete. Well, here we are. They're old neighbors. Remember us? And their banker likes us because we've already considered the implications of the corporate social governance and all these other things. We are ahead of the game, and we're not complaining about it. We did that 10 years ago when we had to start doing all of this. The industry was whining, but we're there. And we're there. It's everyday practice. And as the new generation comes, it's great. It's efficiency. It's not, why do we have to do this? It's like, we're doing this because we're part of the UN SDGs. We're going to meet our targets, and we're keeping more sales revenue in the line because it's not going into the atmosphere. So I think we're in a tremendous place. Take away the worrisome cloud of pipelines and take away all these things that we focus on, the negatives. Overall, we're sitting in an excellent space from a global point of view.
Do you think do people agree with you on that point, or what is sort of, when you're talking with your colleagues, being in the industry for so long? I mean, I'm in Vancouver, so I'm not in the Calgary world per se. Of course, I know a lot of people from Calgary and surrounding areas like Red Deer but when you have this conversation, everybody's a little bit different, but what's the general flavor of response?
Am I buying or not? Is the conversation happening if I'm buying, or is it they're buying? So when I'm buying, everything I say is right. But in general, I'm probably a bit of a minority. But a decade ago, this sort of talk, this sort of thinking was a bit onerous because it meant more taxes, more rules, more issues. But the world is expecting more rules, more issues. We have to stay with the times. So I've been kind of surprised how well received it is, and partly it's because we've been doing this and doing it well for a decade. So when we've started rolling out implementing programs on behalf of the government, I'm rarely hearing, well, what's this, or the negative talk, even though it's in the Alberta situation, it's from the tier fund, which is a levy on the industry for carbon. So I'm actually deploying something that they've been taxed on to use in the betterment of the industry. And at various times that has, that would be a negative conversation, like, why are you the representative of something bad? But I don't see that anymore. In fact, I see people really getting behind it, and most people realize the efficiency of it. Like, why would I let emissions go into the atmosphere when I can actually recycle, reuse, and sell? It's efficiency. So, as always with human nature, any change gets a little bit of grumbling. That was a decade ago, but a lot of the world is there now, and here we come in as Canadians saying, oh yeah, no, we do this every day. We're doing the right thing every day. Look, we've got these new things in our cars called seat belts, and we wear ours all the time. They're not that bad, and they actually save lives. I'm very happy where we are. So no, in general, when I'm talking to people, my colleagues, my friends, generally it's positive, even when I'm not buying.
Right. Okay, Darcy, we got to talk about we got to talk about a couple of these programs, because Jackson came on. He touched on them, but he knew you were coming on, so we didn't dig into them that much. So I want to talk about the methane technology implementation program, and I also want to talk about BROA. Bro assessment program. I always have trouble when I see this one. So let's talk about MTIP first, and then let's get into the BROA program.
Okay, you're doing it in reverse order, but we can do that.
No, that's okay. Go in the order that makes most sense.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go in the order that makes sense, but it's not the way they were deployed. So you're actually correct. Methane technology implementation program came out first, but actually it should have been the other way around, or it's more logical the other way around. So one of the things we're talking about on a global basis as Carbon Connect International, in fact, this morning I was talking with two different calls into the Gulf region and the Middle East about what do we do? Well, what you do is you have a baseline and an implementation. Excuse me. So first you have to know what you have. I'd even go back one step further. Training. What is methane? How does it affect us? How dangerous is it as a GHG? Why do we care? It's not even an argument about climate change. It's an argument about, okay, this is what it is, and this is how methane gets in the atmosphere. Why do we care? And so once we have that idea, and you can get some pretty detailed training now as to methane emissions, where do you start? You have to have a baseline. So our whole mantra is becoming baseline and implementation. And baseline is, in fact, the Alberta program of baseline and reduction opportunity, or BRO assessment. And all it is very simplistically measuring every possible spot where you can have an emission. So it's not terribly high tech. It's some sort of a camera or an imaging device, and some sort of a facility that could leak, whether that's a pipe, a fitting, a flange, a piece of rubber separating the two, a weld that broke. So you don't know your problem until you measure it. And this is what this baseline and reduction opportunity, the BROA, is all about, is the government putting $10 million of tier money, which was collected from carbon levy, into the program to determine the baseline. So we will help companies up to 80% of their cost get out there and measure well sites, plants, batteries, big plants, wherever there could be a leak. We will help fund the measurement and the baseline setting. then that the important thing is where that data goes, right? That data comes in and it allows the government to build a baseline. And from this, the government and industry, frankly, to build a baseline. From this, they can say, oh, we've got this particular place where we've got some issues with fugitives. Let's fix it. And that immediately rolls into the next program, which is Mtip, which is the Methane Technology Implementation Program. And again, it's very simple. It's 10 or so categories of technologies that have 5 or 10 vendors of each. You can pick up the phone and get a vendor to build you, sell you, install for you something that eliminates, reduces, recycles greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. So BROA measures it and defines it. Mtip, or the federal government's ERF program, rolls it right into funding mechanisms for fixing it or mitigating it or removing it from the system.
But so it's funny though. So Mtip actually did come first though, and then they realized, well, we didn't have. There's no funding for that.
Oh, I think they realized all along in the right order. I mean, I'm very, very impressed with the with the Alberta Department of Environment and Parks. Great staff, and I know that on the British Columbia side, you have some great staff too, both in the Climate Change Secretariat and in the Energy Department and Saskatchewan. So those people at the government level knew the right order, but finding a delivery agent and deploying the program is actually more difficult than you'd think. I know, because that's what I live. And 2 years ago or 3 years ago, if you'd asked me about it, I'd have probably shrugged my shoulders and looked for the drilling budget, right?
Right.
But it's actually very difficult to have somebody look at it through scientific eyes and do calculations and really get a handle on expectations versus actual. And that's where really that's Carbon Connect's expertise. Is in our back room, we have some really smart, good engineers and other technical people that really assess and take an agnostic look at what we're doing, making sure that we're actually saving GHGs from getting in the atmosphere and looking at the dollar per ton it's costing us to do so. So the government all along had the plan. It's just the delivery agent kind of, Mtip came first, and that was great. And then the baseline measurement came second, which is helping us get first.
I want to, with Carbon Connect, it's sort of an interesting thing because honestly, Darcy, when I first found out about Carbon Connect, I thought it was I knew it wasn't a government body, but I thought it was a more like a non-profit organization or something like that was meant to distribute funds. And I'm somewhat familiar with it because my wife works in a non-profit of that sort of, it's delivers programs and things like that. A lot of it is federally funded and things like that. But you're actually a private company that distributes funds on behalf of the government. And that was actually it shouldn't be new to me, but it was a new setup for me. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a good observation because it is a bit unique. But I think it's really efficient. I think having technical people, engineers and other technical people delivering technical programs for an industry that's very technical makes a lot of sense. And that's the space we want to be in. And why we started Carbon Connect is we felt very strongly that there wasn't anybody in that space. And in fact, how the seeds of this company got started were probably more from the Middle East than from here, in that the three of us were sitting around in the Middle East and watching governments and regulators saying, wow, how do we get this done? Because they knew what they had to do. They made the commitments. They've got lots of engineers, but deploying is difficult. And probably 10 sentences into the discussion, we said, oh, we're doing that in Alberta like this and like this and like this. We can actually do that in Alberta. And so we sort of morphed from a need, saying globally, there's a huge need how to get things done. I'll go back to the reference to Jackson. We're sitting in a meeting, a subsequent meeting, also not on this continent. And everybody said, okay, how do we do this? How do we get our UN SDGs. How do we make it happen? Nobody knew what to say. There was literally silence. And finally Jackson said, well, in Canada, we do this. And again, we had another aha moment that said, we do this. So we decided then that there is a real space for technical, for-profit, competent delivery people and to deploy programs. And I think the government of Alberta was looking for that all along, and very happy to collaborate with us on getting these two programs deployed. And for me, it's meaningful because I've worked as a CEO of a little junior oil company. I've worked in the industry, and so many times you get delivery from people that aren't in the space at all. I was very passionate to make this easy to use, straightforward, and kind of engineering-ish for the people in the oil and gas companies so they could understand it, sign up, and simply get the job done. And I think thus far it's been quite successful in that. So yeah, it is a space that there's a need.
That must be a fun feeling to be able to have worked in the industry, know what it's like to have someone show up essentially. Maybe they even have cash, but they really don't. They just have the cash and they maybe have the idea and some research numbers. But then there's this huge divide. That must be quite gratifying. Again, being in the industry for 33 years and being in a position to be able to deliver that and knowing that that end user is actually going to be able to it's going to help their operations, not bog it down,
Yeah.
essentially.
That's the goal. Yeah. And I think the government's happy because it gets done. And the industry's happy when they can speak to somebody who speaks their language. And there's so many places on earth where this happens collaboratively. Europe is a great example. You know, a lot of the European operators have worked with their regulator and their people on the ground much more collaboratively than we would think is the norm.
Well, and in all fairness to people, more so than we get told. I mean, if you don't get the information, I mean, I've learned. I think we've only done maybe 20 shows of Crownsmen Energy, and it's almost embarrassing how little I knew about an industry that I would publicly talk about supporting. I knew nothing about it. But in all fairness, I wouldn't have known where to go because when you do see the support you're talking about in the bubble, a lot of the support that's coming out, it's so I don't know what the I don't even I hate even using the word politicized because it's not even the right word. It's so I'll just go back to the bubble. It's just it's obviously so sort of a sheltered view that you know it's not right either. But then if you turn and try to get other sort of public mainstream information, it's so watered down it doesn't really provide you anything. And that's so in all fairness to people, that's a real problem when they don't just get good, clean information.
Hey, I'll politicize your answer in a non to it's being centrist about things.
Mm.
I find that very often we as an industry globally are either running to the right side or running to the left side, and we've got to do it this way because, and then the
Because
political answer comes out.
yeah.
No, can we just please come to the center and work it out without? It's maybe not. It's maybe politicized, but it's polarizing. And the minute we as industry can stop the polarization, we generally tend to win. It's a lot less yelling. Things get done. I like the center, and I think we need to do that. And that's we're Canadians. We're good at the center. We own the space. Let's milk it.
Yeah, and the thing is that I'm finding as well, again, in all fairness to people, is that I'm finding the more we dig, I mean, and I talked to you about this off the air. I didn't know if a Vancouver, host doing a Alberta show, how well that would be responded to. It was amazing response. I mean, just yesterday I got an email from someone wanting to come back on the show because people do want to talk and they do want to get the information out there and just get the information. They don't want to have these. I mean, people enjoy politics and social issues. Of course they do.
Mhm,
I enjoy
mhm,
them as well. But
mhm.
but they also especially when you're in industry and you're trying to advance an industry, you just need to get that information out there, and it can't always be tainted by that. Have you but you talked about 10 years ago there was sort of more pushback, but now you're finding that more people, is it a lot easier to have that conversation?
Absolutely. I was surprised. Some of the people that I went to when we first rolled out the Mtip, I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get a beating,
Mm,
for joining the other side. Kind of, it wasn't that way at all. But put us back in the spot 10, 15 years ago. We were struggling with prices. We were
mm,
struggling. There was a zillion little independent operators, and we were all trying to get land and having royalty squeezes on us with overrides, and it was a tough slug. The last thing on earth we needed in our 5-man organization or 5-person organization was some guy that you got to hire to do regulatory stuff to make sure we're not
mm,
emitting pollution. Well, that was 15 years ago. That's a bunch of old grumpy guys like me. The next generation is a whole different thinking and a whole different philosophy. People aren't complaining about what we have to do, to put the green card out every week. Everybody embraces it because we all know it's going to the right place and it's doing the right thing. So times have changed. The generation has changed. They think a lot differently. And
mm,
so I find a lot less pushback for a lot of reasons. Back then, 15 years ago, these emission regulations were new and they were just more to do. you
mm.
know, I
Yeah.
could be doing my drilling budget, but instead I've got to spend time, calculating this or that and then reporting to the government. That's just human nature. You're gonna complain, oh, I've got to wear a seatbelt now. What next are they gonna think of, right? You know, uh it's just human nature. So I think we've gone through all that. Other jurisdictions in the world are going through it now.
Mm,
We've gone through it. We know what we're doing. We're comfortable in it. We've realized the benefits. Guess what? Mila represents some of the most groundbreaking, leading
mhm,
edge technologies on the planet because we do it every day.
mhm. Yeah, we also had Q Energy on from who's a member of Mila. I mean, that's just amazing, amazing what that team is doing. Just to sort of pull back from that, just sort of as we sort of get to the tail end of the interview, Darcy, is helping people understand what is driving that change, because I think that is a frustrating thing for people when something's happening and they're not even sure why.
Mhm.
There's things like you know regulatory bodies that they won't purchase supply unless it's produced in a certain way, or banks that won't fund it, or
Mhm.
there's all these different factors that come in. And of course, I don't want to keep you for 2 hours, but can you talk a little bit about that, just that perspective of why some of this, beyond the beyond the global warming thing, because I mean, that is a whole other thing to look at, but
Mhm.
there's other factors that are coming in, and I think those are important to touch on for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I liken this to back, I guess, in the 80s when the big insulation push came on from the federal government. People had no idea how much their home was leaking heat.
Mm,
And so people would do assessments. It's like, wow, those windows are just, look at the heat going. And then there were programs to fix the insulation issues in homes once you realized you were leaking heat. Well, this is exactly this is exactly what we're doing. We're measuring the baseline. Oh, wow, we're leaking through that window. Well, let's take advantage of this program to buy some insulation to put in the way. No different. But what's driving it is not just I have to follow the rules and meet the regulators' demands. What's driving it is the financial community as well, and generally doing the right thing for the environment, not not taking a side on the environment, but we don't think it's good to burn plastic at the campfire because stuff goes in the atmosphere. Well, why would we accept that in our daily industry? No,
mm,
just keep stuff out of the atmosphere. That's pretty basic. And so we have changed as people, and it's just not good to do that. And the generation has changed. The younger generation has a whole lot different philosophy on having four walls of their own or having three of those common. And the lending institutions have changed, and the capital. Who has the capital? Private equity is third or fourth generation. It's not grandpa anymore. It's grandpa's grandkids. And they might think completely differently. And they go to the banker and say, unless you, Mr. Banker, Ms. Banker, invest this money and have some carbon accounting, we're pulling our money. Well, guess what? They're going to push that requirement onto the people they're lending to and saying, oh, here's your X number of dollar loan for your capital project. By the way, we need to see a report on the carbon molecules in this spending. Don't know what to do, but you better figure out how to do it, because otherwise you're not getting the money. Well, suddenly people are talking, how are we going to do this? Because it's just the way business is going to work.
And is that just to touch on that a little more? Is that part of the push? Is that when you have this generational money that comes in, we'll call it old money, but it's sort of old money with new ideals. Does that have that trickle down right into the to the pump in Alberta?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to see not just carbon accounting on the molecules that are floating around surface in the pipe. We're going to see reserves booking based on carbon intensity. So reserves in the industry are your bank of the future. There will be, this is my opinion, but there will be in the future a carbon reserves accounting model. And I say this with some surety. Way back 20 years ago, the Society of Petroleum Engineers was part of a group of reserves people that started a program called the PRMS, Petroleum Resource Management System. And PRMS is used globally by some big oil and gas producers that aren't in a jurisdiction where the government regulates it, like what happens in Canada with the 51, 101, 52, 51, 101. I'm not a reserves guy.
I did a show on that. Now you made me slip.
There's a bunch of digits that start with 50 something.
I know.
So 10 years, and what happened is SPE was a key part, and Canadian input was a key part of how you keep reserves integrity globally. And they invented this PRMS, PRMS. I always get those mixed up. Petroleum Resource Management System. The next thing that we're already talking about, it's not there yet, is the CRMS. So the carbon resource management system is going to be just as important as the petroleum assets in your reservoir. The carbon assets and how much carbon is going to be used to get them to the consumer is going to be as big of a factor as reserves evaluation. I'm saying maybe the next 10 years, it's coming. So it will be the standard.
And is Canada, when you look at that coming, is Canada in a position are they also in a good position of that, because they've had that 10 or 15 years working towards where they're at now?
Absolutely, because we not just can estimate it as good scientists, we've been doing it. How do you practically do carbon efficiency when producing? Oh, like this, because thanks to the AER and the regulations we've had for a decade, we're doing it every single day. And 90% of the jurisdictions on Earth aren't. So guess what we are? We're leaders, and there's a massive export market. The offshore guys are way ahead because they've never liked random gas floating around an offshore rig. That has implications. So, the North Sea has been electrified for years from a control point of view. It's logical. But all the brownfield, the onshore, everywhere on Earth where it's old fields or even not so old fields where they've done this massive market, and we know what to do. We've been doing it for a decade. We do it every day, and things like the BROA program and the Mtip program and the ERF program federally are just a sophisticated help to the industry that others aren't even at the concept yet.
I just wanted to actually, before we wrapped up, and I realized I wanted to know this. I should have asked it earlier, but on these programs, do companies reach out to you? Who is the beneficiary? Is the operator or the provider?
Both.
Both.
They're different. So the Mtip is the service provider and the operator can apply, but the operator gets the money. So
Okay.
for actually deploying technology, physically buying capital assets or assets in the field, the oil company, the oil and gas operator is reimbursed. On the baseline assessment, the service provider on behalf of the oil company is reimbursed. So the money, the funding does go to the service provider, but it can't go to them generally. It has to be tied to an operator project. So the operator has to give the go ahead and the permission, but the money goes to the service provider. So on the measurement, service provider gets the money. On the implementation, operator gets the money.
Okay. And then for people to reach out and find out more about it, you have, I mean, we'll have links to your website and everything like that. And then there's, I'm assuming there's a contact page that they can submit their information and then sort of get the ball rolling if they want to sort of start the conversation with you.
Yep. It's really straightforward. CarbonConnectInternational.com is our website. If you go there, under programs, there are two massive Shrek-like green letters blocks. One says Mtip and one says BROA, and there's FAQs there. There's program guides. There's all the information you need. And I think actually on the Government of Alberta Parks, if they go there, I believe it links into our page as well. So a number of places where they can find it. Shouldn't be hard to find, but the contact information is there. And
yeah, well, we'll have plenty of links too. Darcy, thank you for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. There's definitely some more streams that I wish we had more time to unpack. Hopefully we will get you back on. I think as the industry continues to evolve, there is a lot more that you and I could discuss, but with a camera on, so that we're actually sharing the information. I think you're going to have to tap L so that we get the trilogy here.
I will, but he spent some time in politics here. You have to give him 2 slots to get all his speaking done.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, we need the content, so perfect. Darcy, thank you very much. I'm going to do a quick sign off to everybody, but thanks for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Okay, Gowdy, where can people go to comment? I think we're going to get lots of good feedback on that interview. The amount of knowledge that Darcy and his team have is just unbelievable. Probably the only limit to that interview would be the ability of the questions that I can come up with. Where can people follow, comment, suggest new guests, sponsor, what have you?
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you'd like to be part of the Crownsmen Energy Show, either as a guest or would like to recommend someone, you can contact us, info@crownsmen.com. This can not just be, maybe not just for the Crownsmen Energy Show, but the Crownsmen Show and Mining Now as well. So, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Gowdy. And they can follow, share. There's lots of social media everywhere. Pretty much Google Crownsmen or put it into LinkedIn or Twitter or anything else. Actually, we're not very active on Twitter.
No. LinkedIn, Facebook, sometimes Instagram.
We haven't had a hashtag trend on Twitter yet.
No.
Need to get more controversial, maybe. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We hope you keep subscribing and following and commenting. We really do appreciate it. See you on the next episode of Crownsmen Energy.